Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have an early impression video on a fragrance that was actually sent to me by two people. And anytime I get the same fragrance sent to me twice by two different people, I know that it's one that I have to review and talk about. So I have worn this once to bed. I actually wore 4 fragrances to bed last night, but this was one of them. And I'm wearing this as my scent of the day today. And so I think Shiva sent me this, and I think Jonathan sent me this, Jonathan 1970. So thank you very much to anyone who's really sent me anything, but especially these two chaps. If I got that right, could have been someone else, but I think Shiva was the one that was talking about how much he was kind of into the house of Mayo Fusciuni. And the fragrance we're going to talk about today is a 10-year-old fragrance. Hard to believe. It came out in 2013. The house was founded just a couple years before this, so this is actually one of his earlier works. The older bottles had like a red sticker on the front, and I think the new bottles now, the sticker is in black. I don't know about reformulations or anything like that. I would assume not with a, smaller indie house like this. And Mayo Fusciuni is kind of his stage name, if you will. His real name is Giuseppe Imprasabile. And so this is a woody, spicy fragrance according to Parfumo, and it's called Luce. Okay, so here's one sample, and then again, Jonathan gave me a very kind sample. 100 mils is a little bit over $210, I believe. 100 mils is 210 bucks. Yes, retail. That's what it goes for. And it's interesting because whenever you look at this fragrance, if you just go click on, search for it on Google or something, go to some of the houses that sell or some of the websites that sell kind of these indie perfumes, and you'll see that they'll say fragrance family, and many categorize this as like a leather fragrance. I don't get that at all, and I like to kind of smell the fragrances first before I dive into other videos or note listings or anything like that. And so I wore this and I started to make my notes. And then when I came back and actually looked at the notes, I was a little bit surprised because it wasn't, the base was kind of what I expected, but the rest of the fragrance construction, the top and the mid, actually were not. The base is the only thing that stayed true to my expectations because the base was about vanilla and benzoin. And so if you look on this, if you go search YouTube for this perfume, you'll actually only find one review, and it's a dual review. There's Luce, and then also, the person that did it, which I believe his channel is called the Niche Fragrance Collector. I really like his channel. Actually, I like his work. He's very well spoken. I like his approach. But he did this. This is the only video that I found on YouTube on Luce. There's really almost nothing about it. He did a very good job breaking it down, but he actually did a 15-minute video or so in 2 parts. So half of it was Luce, the other half was another Mayo Fusciuni fragrance, which I've never smelled before. So I'm going to try to focus on Luce today. I'm going to give you my thoughts. I'm going to read a little bit about it. And we're just going to talk about the fragrance. Don't forget, this is an early impression, so this is not a full review by any stretch. This is basically all that, I've worn, half of this decant, if you will, and, I don't even think I've sprayed this one yet. But yeah, that's it. That's all I've worn of it. So this is an early impression video. But when I first sprayed it, basically what comes to mind to me, and I have a little bit of a different perspective from, say, the niche fragrance collectors' ideas on this fragrance because, he focuses specifically on niche fragrances. And like I said, I really like his channel. I think you should definitely subscribe to it. I think you should go watch his video on this if you're interested in learning more. But I kind of view it as a little different. I come at this fragrance from a different point of view because I'm all about going everywhere in the fragrance world. I don't just focus on niche. I love vintages. I love designers. I do like niche fragrances, but my heart is with vintage. And because my heart is with vintage, instantly I thought of one thing when I sprayed this and smelled it and started to wear it. And that one thing that jumped into my mind is actually not a thing at all. It's a person. And the person that jumped into my mind was the great Annick Menardo. And the reason that Annick Menardo jumped into my mind is that if you've smelled some of her work, some of her perfumes, like for example, she's well known for creating the Jaipur Homme series from Boucheron. This is probably one of the best cheapy fragrances money can buy. This is the Eau de Toilette, which I think is a little bit more masculine because the Eau de Toilette has more citruses in the opening. And it doesn't come across as, you know, heavy, vanilla, that kind of thing, like the Eau de Parfum. But even the Eau de Parfum is a fantastic fragrance. I love them both. And I think this is one of the best $20 or $30 you can spend, as far as this is a 90s fragrance from Boucheron, the best from Boucheron in my opinion. I used to think I preferred the Eau de Parfum, but the more I wore the Eau de Toilette, this is actually a vintage bottle. The new version of the Eau de Toilette is completely clear. See how this front piece is clear right now? The older bottles had kind of a, you know, kind of this smoky looking glass around the outside. The new bottles, it's completely clear for the Eau de Toilette. And so this is an older bottle when Boucheron, before Boucheron was basically purchased and now distributed by Inter Parfums, which is what this one is. And I think Inter Parfums does a great job. So even the new one is good. You don't have to go for a vintage, but I did find a good deal on a vintage of the Eau de Toilette, so I got it. But again, if you know Anique Minardo's work, even something like this, DSquared Potion, which is another this is discontinued, and prices on this are outrageous. But if you love Anique Minardo's work, this is what designers used to be 12 years ago. This came out, I think, a couple years before Luce did. And this is the Eau de Toilette. There's also an Eau de Parfum version of DSquared Potion. But this is, I mean, Anique Minardo through and through. When you smell this, you smell Jaipur Homme. You know, if you know Anique Minardo's work, you kind of have this idea in your mind already. You get a little bit of this amber, a little bit of cinnamon, and she does this combination with, I think, one of the best uses of benzoin in perfumery. I mean, she is just a master at using that benzoin note, and her fragrances really come across. That's why I call her the Great Anique Minardo. That is her nickname from now on, as far as I'm concerned. If you've smelled this as well, there's a little bit of that DNA in this as well. I didn't grab it earlier, but it just hit me. If you've smelled Body Kouros by Anique Minardo, this is one of the older bottle styles that still kind of had this cap. The new ones basically look like the Kouros bottle, and it's no longer called Body Kouros. It's now called Kouros Body. They transpose these two right here and put it in the Kouros bottle. But I think this is still available. Oh God, Kouros. I think this is still available for purchase. But I have never actually done a comparison with the new stuff. I assume it's still quite good, but this is what the bottle looked like when it first came out, with this weird kind of stand on the bottom. So if you know Anique Minardo's work, between Jaipur Homme, DSquared Potion, and Body Kouros, you'll kind of get an idea of where I'm going with this, right? This, you'll get in the ballpark, let's say. You know, this ambery, benzoiny, kind of blurry, you know, warmth about the fragrances. And that is the very first thing that you're going to get when you smell Luce. Off the top, you know, very first thing you get is the base, interestingly enough. That I get is the base. You get a little bit of woods along with that base, along with the base benzoin and amber and vanilla. But the vanilla is not too sweet, so don't let that put you off if you don't like vanilla. It's not too sweet and it's not too powdery. It's just kind of really like the warmth of benzoin. I was actually very kindly gifted some ingredients by Russian Adam, and one of them was just benzoin in and of itself. It's extremely sticky, and, you know, if you put it on a blotter or something, you know, you'll smell this ingredient that you've smelled in the base of so many fragrances, and that's almost what you get from the very beginning. Now, you will also begin to get this unique Mayo Fusciuni green, woody, natural feel here. And that natural feel, the green, woody elements, I think is really where Mayo Fusciuni fragrances tend to shine. I did a review of Spirito. That's my only other Mayo Fusciuni review that I've done for YouTube. And that also had this very natural outdoor feel. If you go watch that review, I actually said that the fragrance reminds me of the album cover of REM's Green. If you've ever listened to REM's Green album, you know, it looks like you're looking up at a bunch of big trees when you look at the album, but actually, if you look closer, you'll realize you're not looking up at a bunch of big trees. You're looking down at water, and it's reflecting the image of the trees. And that's kind of how Mayo Fuscioni's fragrances appear to me. They all seem like they have this kind of naturalistic, with nature harmony about them. And this also has that same feel. That's feeling like his, you know, like his calling card, if you will. Very natural, with nature, part of nature, like you're part of a grander plan, which kind of, as humans, we are. We don't own the earth or anything like that. We're just part of it, right? And that's kind of how his fragrances come across to me. The woody bits feel like they're done with a very deft hand. It smells to me like a mixture. When I first smelled this, I thought, okay, maybe you're getting like cedar and this very woody smelling patchouli, almost like he isolated the woody aspects of patchouli and had that, you know, put into the fragrance. And remember, this guy is a chemist. He's a chemist by trade. He was actually working as a chemist before he began creating his own fragrances. And so isolating a, you know, fractional distillation of patchouli or something like that, I'm sure is well within his means. Once I started reading, you know, about the fragrance and reading some reviews and stuff like that, some people compared it to Bogner's fragrances, B-O-G-N-E-R. I've never smelled any Bogner fragrances, although they are on my list, like Deep Forest, I think, or something like that. You know, those are on the potential to buy list for me, but I've never had a chance to smell them. But I can imagine that, comparison. They also mentioned Jil Sanders, which the more I thought about it, the more I thought, maybe just a little bit, because Jil Sanders, if you smelled kind of their late 80s, early 90s, you know, like I said, I've never smelled any of the Bogner fragrances, but I do have a video coming on Background very soon. And so this will be a review that we're going to do very soon, hopefully. The difference is that Jil Sander fragrances they focus more on the, they really focus more on, I think, the fruity elements. So there's like this raspberry note that Jil Sanders plays with a lot in the late 80s, early 90s masculines. And you don't get any of that in the Mayo Fuscioni, but maybe some of the, you know, woody, outdoor, ambery facets that kind of blend together. I could see that. I could see this fragrance kind of coming from that time period, if you will. I think that's a fair comparison, more than saying that it smells like this or that fragrance. And you know, the emphasis on the fruity notes with Jil Sanders, I think really takes it in a different direction. But if you focus on the fragrance Luce itself, you really end up having this picture formed in your mind of kind of this sensual, woody, spicy, almost smelling like there's heliotrope in here. And if you've heard me describe heliotrope before, you know it kind of has this Play-Doh-y, you know, imagine like a dentist taking a mold of one of your teeth, right? And pulling it out, and it keeps the shape of your tooth. That texture of the mold, of the Play-Doh, is kind of what heliotrope brings to a fragrance. And it almost feels like it has that, even though it's not listed as a note. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of this ambery heliotrope thing going on. And by the way, I've been wearing this all day. This is a 7-hour dry down, so I have a late dry down here, which this fragrance kind of 6, 7, 8 hours in, I feel like it just kind of evaporates away. It just fades away, if you will. So the meat of the fragrance is the first 4 or 5 hours to me. And I just did a fresh spray about an hour ago. So the note listing has a couple items listed that is pretty interesting. So let me read you a couple blurbs and let's read about the note listing. So here's the description according to one site. It says, the journey, and this is a quote from Mayo Fuscioni, the journey has reached its point, its threshold, the silence. Luce comes from an introspective journey that begins with the start of a new day. When nature has not completely awakened, the air is still wet, everything is stasis. And that's a direct quote from him. Now, the note listing, interestingly enough, according to Parfumo, is cedar leaf in the top with birch and leather, heart of patchouli, sandalwood, and tobacco, with a base of vanilla, ambergris, and benzoin. Now, is there real ambergris in here? I have no idea. It's possible some of these smaller indie brands can get their hands on a decent sized chunk of ambergris and can kind of power their houses for years and years to come. I don't know if this is real or if this is an accord that he's using. Either way, the ambergris is way in the background, if there is even any in here. It's not about that for me. It's much more about the benzoin, the vanilla, and the patchouli. And so once I looked at the note listing, I was thinking maybe I missed something because, you know, I love birch. I love leather. You add them together and you create one of my favorite accords in perfumery, basically this smoky, leathery type fragrance. And if you know birch fragrances, like for example, there's a birch leather that I have pounded the table on. I think it's one of the greatest fragrances ever created. I think it's the greatest Edmund Rudnitska fragrance ever created, and it's Eau de Hermes from 1951. Eau de Hermes is, I think, just for me, an absolute masterpiece. And, you know, when you think about that birch leather combination, that's one of the first ones that comes to mind. Also, you could mention Santa Maria Novella Peau d'Espagne. I am still hunting a vintage bottle of this. Oh, God. I mean, one of my favorite leathers ever of all time, in my opinion. And I will have a full bottle, a vintage bottle of that one day. You know, when you think about birch and leather, those are the kind of fragrances that come to mind. You get none of that here. None of it. Actually, if I made a note listing, I wouldn't put birch and leather in there. I wouldn't put cedar leaf in there, although I can't say I know exactly what cedar leaf smells like. Maybe it just gives it a little bit of that, you know, fresh outdoor scent I was mentioning at the top, where male Fusciuni is seeming to me to be kind of known for that DNA. If you've ever smelled Graphite by Montana, I think that has a cedar leaf note as well. So there are some fragrances that I've smelled that have that cedar leaf note, but birch and leather, no, I don't get hardly any of that. Sandalwood and tobacco, hardly none. I mean, tobacco is one of my favorite notes in perfumery. Sandalwood is such a kind of gentle, calming, you know, presence in a fragrance. And do I get sandalwood? Not in the sense that I would expect it. Not like smelling Bois d'Azil or Egoist or, you know, anything like that. Those kind of legendary sandalwood, Samsara. No, none of that. Maybe just a little bit in the background. Almost no tobacco, no birch, no leather, even though they're in the note listing. And so I started to think, you know, what is this fragrance really going for? And when you look into it and you really start thinking about it, Luce basically means light in Italian. And with the first time I kind of got to researching the name and, you know, wearing the fragrance and kind of thinking about it, I was like, you know what, this isn't a very good name. I don't really understand the name, I don't think. And it took me a little while of, you know, thinking and wearing and smelling and to kind of come around to it. And now, the more that I've worn the fragrance, the more I think I like the name. It's grown on me, because when you look at it from the standpoint of physics, you know, when you say light, which is Luce is light. So Luce is light, which is basically, when you look at it from the standpoint of physics, is any electromagnetic radiation that can be detected by the human eye is basically light. So when you open your eyes, you don't say to yourself, I'm viewing gamma rays now, eyes, right? No, you just see light. And there is this bright aromatic side to the amber and the benzoin that's used here. And so you can also look at light in the terms of most amber fragrances that you smell kind of have this heavy, you know, resinous. They almost weigh you down, right? And you could think of the light Luce in this fragrance as almost being like illuminating or having this spotlight effect. So imagine carrying a candle through a house before electricity, right? And whatever the candle was near was illuminated. That is why you are enlightened when you learn something new. You are enlightened, right? When you learn a new bit of knowledge. If you've been living in the dark or, You know, if you've been sleeping and someone turns on a light, the very first thing you do is you shield your eyes or you turn your head away, right? Because the new knowledge is almost too much to accept right away. And you need time to become acclimated to the new light, to the new knowledge, if you will. And the light in Luce, it's almost like this peaceful, gentle, accepting light. If you have smelled kind of that soft, light, candle, illuminating aspect of this is Dia Man by Amouage. And this is a Bertrand Duchefort masterpiece fragrance. It doesn't get the love of Jubilation 25 for men. But what a fragrance this is. I mean, I wore this to work probably in the last month or so, and I mean, just perfection. So perfect for that type of setting. Oh, and it's so very good. And Dia also means day or light. And if you smelled kind of the illuminating aspects of Dia Man, you have an idea of that soft candle-like warmth. And so imagine if you took that candle-like illuminating soft side of Dia Man, right? And you mixed it with Anique Minardo's benzoin heavy amber style, and you added this, you know, spotlight from behind it, and you just, you know, illuminated it. And that's kind of the idea, I think, of Luce. When I wear that, that's a great way to explain it to someone who knows perfume. Now, if you don't know Anique Minardo's style, you might have a harder time understanding that. But just understand that, to me, the focus is on the benzoin, the vanilla, and the patchouli. And so let me read you a couple other little blurbs about the fragrance. So according to Fragrantica, if you go to Fragrantica, you'll see kind of a little quote, and it says, "The cycle of poetry ends with a state of peace. Luce lives in the balance of light, the head bowed towards the heart, such as listening to a lullaby, I assume they meant to say, but listening a lullaby." And if you listen to Mayo Fusciuni, there are some interviews on him. If you go Mayo Fusciuni Luce and search, you'll find the Niche Fragrance Collector's video at the very top, because he's the only one that's done a review of this. And then you'll see some interviews with Giuseppe himself. And in one of the interviews, he talks about how his fragrances come from a place of emotion and feelings. And that's why it makes talking about notes with these fragrances such a, you know, a task that's fraught with landmines. Because if you came in here and just said birch, leather, cedar, patchouli, tobacco, sandalwood, vanilla, amber, benzoin, there are a ton of fragrances that frag heads have probably smelled that will get you nowhere even in the ballpark here. This is completely different. That's why I'm comparing it to Anique Minardo's style. Yeah, absolutely. And so Luce is basically based on the writings of an architect named Louis Kahn. And Louis Kahn is famous for his architecture style, obviously, but he's also famous for some quotes. You know, he was kind of a thinker as well. He wasn't, he was a very famous architect, and if you watched my Spirito video, I mentioned kind of the picture on the front of the box, right? The bottle doesn't have a picture. It's a very simplistic bottle with just a name and, you know, the name of the house at the top, the name of the fragrance, and that's it. Pure Parfum or Extrait down below. But if you actually look at the box, there is a picture on his fragrances. And Spirito had some forest, some green trees, some tall trees on the front. Luce has almost like this hallway that you're looking down with architecture. You can tell that they're very brash and bold kind of lines and cuts and styles. And so this gentleman, you know, Louis Kahn is a famous architect. But he has some amazing quotes, and a couple of them I want to read to you. So it says, this is one of his quotes: "From comes Form comes from wonder. Wonder stems from our in-touchness with how we were made. One senses that nature records the process of what it makes, so that in what it makes, there is also the records of how it was made. In touch with this record, we are in wonder. This wonder gives rise to knowledge, but knowledge is related to other knowledge, and this relation gives a sense of order, a sense of how they interrelate in harmony that makes all things exist. From knowledge to sense of order, we then wink at wonder and say, how am I doing, wonder? Interesting little quote. Let me read you a couple other ones that are quoted to him that I thought were pretty good. One of them is, in a small room, one does not say what one would in a large room. Remember, he's an architect, okay? The pyramids tried to say to you, let me tell you how I was made. The sun never knew how great it was until it hit the side of a building. Now that's an architect quote for you right there. Even a room which must be dark needs at least a crack of light to know how dark it is. And what was the other ones that I really liked? It was, I honor beginnings. Of all things, I honor beginnings. I believe that what was has always been, and what is has always been, and what will be has always been. The creation of art is not the fulfillment of a need, but the creation of a need. The world never needed Beethoven's Fifth Symphony until he created it. Now, we cannot live without it. We are all born with a sense of what to do. Within our own singular limits, we know instinctively that given a sufficient opportunity to put this instinct into practice, we know what to do almost instantaneously, if what we do is true to our singularity. Beautiful quotes that he has, I must say. And you notice some, I think you can almost pick out some of the themes of this fragrance in those quotes. You know, he mentioned the sun, and obviously the sun is our source of light, and I think light has a big factor in this fragrance, this illumination, but not just light as far as the physics side of things, like I mentioned earlier. It's not just light as in the, you know, as in you're seeing electromagnetic radiation with your eyes, right, and calling it light. We're also talking about kind of like the illumination of self. And the search and quest for knowledge. And that's where I think Mayo Fusciuni can go a little bit deeper if you really give it the chance, if you're open. If you go to Fragrantica and read a couple reviews, interestingly enough, the very first one is like, keeps me interested for 30 minutes, then it just turns into a French powder fragrance. You know, and that's it. That's the review. And I think maybe you could view it from that sense, but I would urge you to maybe take one step further. You know, think about the fragrance in these terms while you're wearing it. Think about the architect. Think about light. Think about knowledge. Think about enlightenment. Think about maybe wanting, maybe something that someone, maybe like a master or a professor, or, you know, a teacher or a mentor, someone that you had in your life that wanted to teach you something and you did not want to learn it, and you fought it. And ultimately, it took you time to get to the point where you accepted it as truth, as reality, right? As fact. And that struggle, think about that. You know, think about the light turning on and you kind of shielding your eyes and turning away and looking away because you don't want to hear it. You know, I think that's kind of where that's where this becomes an art form. Is yes, you could look at it as, oh, it's just kind of a 30-minute opening and then it turns into a boring powder fragrance and that's it. And honestly, I don't get very much powder anyways. I get a lot of benzoin. But I was just using that first example, you know, as an example. If you focus on the, you know, if you focus on the notes themselves, the one thing I will say, outside of that Anique Monardo Ambery Benzoin base, which is, I think, the star of the show, star, sun, illuminating. See, you can kind of take it, you can always go the next step, but, and that's where it becomes kind of an art form for me, perfumery as an art, and, you know, having these cause and effect ideas, and letting yourself kind of, almost like you're in an art gallery, almost like you can be in your own personal little art gallery, but by yourself, right? And you know, if you go back to the fragrance and you really wanted to know about notes, the one note that really stands out to me as the heaviest, outside of that ambery benzoiny warmth, this oriental, you know, dry warmth in the base, is patchouli. Patchouli is the note in the heart that really stands out for me. It's the one that I can spray and really smell. And sometimes patchouli can come off as slightly medicinal. There is maybe a little bit of this woody medicinal aspect to the fragrance because of the patchouli. But outside of that, this is kind of a journey. This is a fragrance that, you know, if you like Mayo Fuscioni's work, I think this will speak to you. And sometimes, I've mentioned it before, but you know, sometimes there are just fragrances that speak to you. That's it. I mean, sometimes a fragrance speaks to you or it doesn't. Sometimes you get these images in your head when you're wearing a fragrance, or you don't. And honestly, I've learned to just kind of run with that. I've learned to take that in stride. Sometimes you can't force these things. You know, sometimes a fragrance is for you or it's not. And this is a very personal, sometimes your relationship with a fragrance is very personal. You may like something that I hate. I may love something that you hate. Doesn't mean you're right, I'm wrong, or I'm wrong and you're right, you know. This is an art, not a science, right? And so I may like one artist, you may like another. And that's just kind of how it goes sometimes with these things. Let me read you a blurb that is directly from the brand on these fragrances, because again, this came out in 2013, and so this is directly from the brand. It says, born from a deep soul research, again, emotion, soul, emotion. Notturno and Luce, I've never smelled Notturno. Notturno and Luce represent the completion of a cycle of composition of 2 years. The one lived in the hardness of the dark, the other in the balance of the light. So I'm guessing Notturno was the hardness of the dark, as Luce is the balance of the light. Notturno, the poem takes shape, becomes odorous liquid that reveals its essence at night, its silent presence in the notes of rum, ink, and leather. Luce, the architecture, olfactory, reaches its point, the threshold, quiet ideal for a work of quiet, built on the notes of birch, patchouli, and benzoin, in the darkness and into the light. This cycle completed the metamorphosis of the poetic words in perfume, theorem of passion. So, interestingly enough, there's another blurb. I'll read you one more just because I think these are good. These are a good way to kind of discuss the features of the fragrance without going into the notes, because I think that's kind of the only way you're going to be able to do this, to understand this fragrance without actually smelling it yourself. It's a very hard thing to, you know, it's a very hard thing to describe a fragrance like this to you, because you can't really use the notes outside of your knowledge of past history and stuff like that. You know, if you think about leather fragrances and you think that they're going to smell like Signor, Vivara, or Bandit, you've got something else completely coming. This is absolutely nothing like that. This is not like the leather fragrances that I know and love and adore. This is different. So it says, the journey has reached its point, its threshold, its silence. Luce draws inspiration from the perfect harmony of Louis Kahn's architecture, works in balance, a meeting point between silence and light. I wanted to use my creative sensitivity to give voice to nature and its elements, as if they were architectural bodies against the backdrop of nature. Luce stems from my desire for stillness, my desire to create a balance between nature and Man, between light and silence. An olfactory architecture of the soul. The sensory translation of this perfume opens with the harmony of birch and spruce notes like a plant song at dawn, a slow awakening, a silent presence of man. The absolute balance between light and silence is fully manifested in its heart. The intensity and harmony of sandalwood, patchouli, and tobacco warm the soul. Quietness finds its fulfillment in the deep bottom of this creation, a precious bed of amber and musks, enveloping the warm notes of cedar, vanilla, benzoin, and a superfine leather celebrate this journey into an imaginary inner garden. A fragrance that envelops, protects, spreading its light far and wide. Interesting descriptors. I will say that. And so, yes, that's kind of the fragrance. It's different, although it's reminiscent of maybe some works from the past that you know, if you know and you love perfume, and you know Anique Minardo's work, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. I know that she was kind of really big at the turn of the millennia, and you know, she in the late 90s and early 2000s, she was like a rock star with stuff like Jaipur Homme and DSquared Potion and Body Kouros and stuff like this. I have a perfumer's portfolio video on Anique Minardo. If you want to learn more about her, you can go to my playlist, click on perfumer's portfolio, and you'll pull up Anique Minardo. Interestingly enough, she also did this. And this is kind of one of those outliers for her, and I dismissed it for a long time. But when I ranked her perfumer's portfolio videos, I did not have this, so it wasn't included. But I think I would put this #1 as her work for me because I've grown to, this is Figment Man, by the way, from Amouage. And Figment is an Anique Minardo just masterpiece. I think it's her best work, because it's challenging, it's different. She stepped out of her comfort zone. You know, the civet is, it's almost like, you know, it's almost like if Kouros, but for the modern times. Not that they smell alike, but they both have this bold soul. They have this challenging spirit to them. I love them both, obviously. Kouros is one of my favorite fragrances of all time. And this is actually, I think, my favorite Anique Minardo. Although it doesn't have the DNA that she is so known for, with, you know, that, ambery, benzoiny, resinous, kind of slightly sticky. DSquared Potion has a note in it of thyme, angelica, and mint in the top. And it also has this patchouli amber thing going along. This is actually a really good comparison for Luce as far as designers go. It's a little bit more sweet, though. It's more designer sweet. There's some cashmeran in here, cashmere wood, as they say, gentian, rose, pepper, cinnamon. But that angelica, thyme, and mint almost does something very similar in the top to the way that the cedar leaves are used in Luce. The cedar leaves and birch kind of, I think, play a similar role. So just something to think about. You know, I think it's the best way to describe Luce, because it's a very tough scent to describe. And if you know kind of the candle-like illumination of Dia Man, it'll get you in the ballpark. So imagine that illumination with the Anique Minardo Ambery Benzoin DNA. Let me know what you think of Luce. Thank you to everyone who has sent me these, you know, samples to review. I wouldn't be able to talk about the the breadth of fragrances, the different fragrances that are not in my collection. There's no way I'd be able to do these videos without you guys. So thank you very much. I am very, very grateful to everyone who sent me something. And I've said it before, but if you have sent me something and I have not gotten to it, please be patient. I promise you I will. It's just a matter of time. So let me know what you think of Luce. Let me know what you think of the house of Mayo Fusciuni. If you have experience with the house, if you're interested in knowing the house, all that good stuff, leave a comment, likes, subscriptions, all that stuff helps the channel, helps the YouTube algorithm. So I appreciate everyone watching. Cheers, guys, and I hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye.